Welcome to Evil Podcast, a horror fiction podcast. I'm your host and narrator, Dennis Sarah. In this episode, I have a story about a local park in the wooded area dubbed Devil's Corner. Evil Podcast is made possible by the generosity of the listeners. To help me keep the Evil Podcast going, you can subscribe on whatever podcast player you use. Of course, the best way to help is to become a patron, like Mary Virginia Avery. To become a Patreon, go to patreon.com/evilpodcast, or you can find a direct link on evilpodcast.com. Thank you, Mary, and all the others that have become Patreons. Now on with the story. There's nothing to fear from the full moon. It sheds light when the world is at its darkest, like a guardian of sorts. History and legend would warn us of the wicked creatures that would appear under a full moon, ready to devour the innocent and guilty alike. Folklore would warn us that animals go crazy under the full moon light, and statistics indicate that crime rates go up. It's all misguided nonsense. Evil prefers the dark, then the dim light. In the full moon light, animals act crazy because they are reacting to our fears. Crime goes up under the dim light of the full moon because humans are not adapted to the darkness. It is easier to be a burglar or a mugger in the dim light of the full moon than the darkness of the night. It's not the full moon we should fear. It is the new moon or moonless nights we need to be weary of. Those are the nights that the darkness prevails and true evil is free to hunt. You see, where the full moon rebels against the darkness, the new moon embraces it. If you don't know or not knowledgeable of the phases of the moon is when the light side of the moon faces away from us, when only the dark side is in the night sky. Darkness upon darkness. It's in this absolute darkness where evil festers. It's in this darkness that the true creatures of the night come out to play. It's in this darkness that our story takes place. The late night chill highlighted James's every exhale. He walked quickly through the park, his hands jammed into his pockets of his hooded sweatshirt and his shoulders hunched in an attempt to keep warm. Most people would be fearful of walking through that park in the late of night. James was a little worried, but he was 6'3", a solid 220, and when friends dare the big football stud, he doesn't back down. The dare was simple: cross the park alone without running. The noises from the house party he just left faded as he was approaching the center of Derrick Park. James passed the 2-acre pond on his right as he began to travel into the northwest wooded area, nicknamed Devil's Corner. During the day, the park was filled with families. In the spring, the baseball fields were alive with little leaguers living out big league dreams. In the fall, would bring little football players and tiny cheerleaders. At night, the park takes on a different existence. At one time, local vagrants and drug users would congregate, hidden by the darkness of the northwest woods. Out of sight of the neighbors, they were free to engage in any type of debauchery. But not anymore. 3 years before James attempted his speed walk through the northwest woods, there was an incident. No one knows exactly what had happened, but on a crisp October morning, joggers found a grisly scene. 7 of the night residents of the park, at least they believe it was 7, were spread across the northwest woods, as if they were dandelions caught in a power mower. It took weeks for the authorities to clean up the park and reopen it. Of course, the rumors were rampant about that moonless night. Tales of cult activity and ritualistic sacrifices were at the forefront. Some maintained that the woods itself came alive and rebelled against the encroaching civilization. Whatever had happened, The memory of that night 3 years ago still resonated with the locals, as they nicknamed the northwest woods of the park as the Devil's Corner. So when James, the young testosterone-filled football player, was dared to cross the northwest woods that moonless night, he was well aware of the stories, but how could he chicken out in front of all his friends? When James was midway through the woods, the music from the house party had all but disappeared. The bitter October wind was partially blocked by the trees. It still managed to find its way down the path and occasionally slapped James in the face with a quick blast. The leaves were in various stages of fall. Most of the multicolored leaves were still on the trees, but plenty of leaves had fallen and dried on the floor of the forest and path, as was evident by the occasional crunch underfoot. The only lights James could see were distant street lamps through the thick woods. They served more as a reminder of the surrounding but distant civilization at the end of the path than a guide through the Devil's Corner. The very trees seemed to bend and shift in an attempt to obscure the light from the street lamps, cloaking the northwest woods and the only path through it in silent darkness. James didn't want the quiet of the woods to play with his mind. He purposely would step on dried autumn leaves just to hear them crunch. The noise was his only real companion, he hoped. James thought how strange it was that the noise of crunching leaves actually echoed in the still of the woods. It was these little oddities he would focus on just to keep his mind off his current location. Crunch, 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 stop. James stopped his right foot short of stepping down in the dried leaf, hovering just above it. However, the crunching echo still persisted. James realized the crunching leaves did not create an echo. Something else crunched down on the leaves, step for step with James. He looked around, but the woods can keep its secrets hidden well. James was not sure from what direction the leaf crunching had come from. He started to panic, but then realized it could be one of the guys from the party just messing with him. James concentrated and heard a leaf crunch to his right in the deep woods. He pivoted to his right, violently unzipped his hoodie, and spread his arms out in a come-at-me-bro fashion. James fully expected to hear laughter, the sort of laughter you hear in the boys' locker room when guys pick on each other, fun and at the expense of someone. It certainly was laughter, but not the sort you want to hear in the woods on a moonless night. This was the type of laughter you would hear when a killer had trapped their prey, maniacal and demonic. James lowered his arms and the bravado of his stance melted away. Standing just beyond the path was a luminous figure. It was a gaunt young man in ratty clothes. His whole body, as well as his clothes, were translucent and eerily outlined with a slight purple glow, some type of phantom or spirit of the Devil's Corner. James began to shake when he realized this was no prank. Whatever stood in the woods was smiling at him with murder in its eyes, and it was not alone. Several similar figures stepped out from the trees all around him, each spirit outlined in the same purple glow and sporting the same smile. James was surrounded. As the figures stepped closer from every direction, the fear deep inside James boiled up and became a blood-curdling scream. Days later, the police interviewed the partygoers. They all related the same story of the dare James accepted. They all reported watching him stroll into the night towards the Devil's Corner, and each stated they heard the scream over the music. They were all too afraid to go in the woods that moonless night and see if James was okay. Hope you enjoyed that original story. Strange thing is that sometimes when you sit down to write, a story takes its own direction. I hadn't even thought about the Devil's Corner at all. I was thinking about someone being attacked in the woods by something stalking them, but this kind of wrote itself. There was even another part, another victim, but after what happened to James, I felt that was a good spot to end the story. Just one of those weird things that happen when you write. Again, thank you for listening. If you want to contact me, I'm on Twitter at Dennis Sarah. I'm on Facebook at facebook.com/evilpodcast. You can also go to evilpodcast.com to see past episodes, and also if you want a t-shirt, you can order one there as well. Evil Podcast can be found on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and almost any podcast directory you find. Again, if you want to help support Evil Podcast, go ahead and hit subscribe on whatever podcast player you're on. As well, you can become a Patreon. If you go to patreon.com/evilpodcast or go to evilpodcast.com, we have a direct link there as well. Until next episode, be good. Evil Podcast is written, produced, and narrated by Dennis Sarah, and is copyrighted by Dennis Sarah. Intro music is by Kevin McLeod.